Welcome back. Just what's at stake if Florida restores voting rights to felons who have served their time? Just to be clear, 1.5 million felons were stripped of their right to vote by Governor Rick Scott in 2011. Now, a federal judge is ruling that it's unconstitutional. And Florida residents will get a chance to vote on restoring voting rights this fall. It could have a profound impact on future elections in Florida. Remember, the 2000 presidential election was decided by 537 votes in Florida. Joining us for more are Frank Alcock, a political science professor at New College, and Susan Nylon of the Nylon Report. And we do want to know, we did search for folks opposing the restoration of voting rights to felons, but there were no takers. So, folks, let's start the politics of it. And I said that the other side doesn't really want to talk about it, but, you know, Charlie Crist, when he was governor, restored the voting rights to felons. Rick Scott took them away, presumably because that helps the Republican Party. Is that the conventional wisdom, Frank?
I think that is the conventional wisdom. It's the scale of the disenfranchisement of felons here in Florida with a policy that virtually makes it impossible for all but a tiny few ex-felons to regain their civil rights, disenfranchises 1.6 million potential voters. There's two other states, Iowa and Kentucky, that are in similar situations, but it clearly has political impacts. I'm not sure what the rationale besides that would be. He did that almost immediately when he got into office, and you know, we stand out as an outlier, you know, on this issue.
So I guess I don't understand why there is not more vocal opposition to the restoration of voting rights from the Republicans right now. You saw in Adam's story, the local Republican Party just said, oh, well, we haven't really had time to talk about it.
There's just not a lot of good cover for it. It's such a clear voter suppression tactic, and
well, that hasn't really stopped anybody before.
Yeah, and I would disagree with that. I think there's actually a lot going on. They're just not going to be vocal about it. You know, there is an opposition, but I think, to be honest with you, they're just a little overwhelmed with everything else that they're focusing on right now. And that to come on and make this an issue, I think they were actually surprised it actually made it to the ballot. On the flip side, there's been a ton of money dumped into getting it to the ballot. Over, you know, I want to say, well, I know over $5 million was donated to make that happen, and I'm almost thinking double, but.
You could only imagine what some of the folks who are watching this right now and who will later leave really lovely comments on Facebook would be saying, because felons don't have really a strong constituency out there, and people watching this are going to say, oh, that's just great. I mean, that's the only way the Democrats can win an election in Florida.
There's no facts to back that up. There's none. It's just conjecture. It's the implication that the Democrats are they were a Democrat before they went into prison, and they're a Democrat coming out. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's just something that they don't want to associate themselves with, so they just assume we're only doing this because we're the Democratic Party and we want to increase our base, and it's not true.
And Frank, I understand that there may be some competing constitutional amendments on the ballot next fall, but there has, in terms of what's going on right now, there's been a variety of reactions from Republicans, from some like Adam Putnam saying, well, I don't support the restoration of voting rights to people convicted of any kind of violent crime.
We hear it from a few. Let's see if they maintain that position. I just don't think that there is a compelling argument not to reintegrate these folks into society. And we're talking about, again, after they've finished their prison sentence, after they've done their probation, when they're all done, we want to reintegrate them into society. And there's a lot that comes along mentally with having your voting rights restored and having a voice in the political process and being part of society. Continued punishment at that point, I think there's not a lot of arguments beyond, a lot of them might vote Democratic, and we're worried about that in close elections, and that's just hard to sustain.
All right, we are just getting warmed up, and we'll have much more on restoring the voting rights of felons right after we check the first alert weather, so stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking about restoring voting rights to felons, and joining us for more are Frank Alcock, a political science professor at New College, and Susan Nylon of the Nylon Report. And we also want to say once again, we tried to get people who may oppose restoring voting rights to felons on the show tonight, but there were no takers. Frank, I said at the outset, look, if you look at Florida in the 2000 presidential election, which was won by George W. Bush by just over 500 votes, it turned the top, it gave him the Electoral College. The stakes here potentially could not be bigger.
Yes, and I think there could certainly be consequences, but I don't. The magnitude of the number of disenfranchised voters—they're not all going to register tomorrow. But nevertheless, if these laws were changed, you could have within a few years another few 100,000 voters. And statistically speaking, they probably will. High percentage of them were going to vote Democratic. So in close elections, it could be a game changer. But that's not the reason that we should be doing this. The reason we should be doing this is the right thing to do.
Well, Susan, let me ask you this: is there a line to draw? Anna Putnam, is saying nobody who is convicted of a violent crime. I think that one of the bills going through the legislature basically says if you are convicted of murder or sexual assault, you cannot get your voting rights restored. Should there be any line at all?
Well,
Should there be some kind of line?
My understanding, and somebody could correct me if I'm wrong, but the amendment that is out there that voters will have does not restore the voting rights of a rapist or a murderer.
That's
They just, thank you. They just don't. So there is a line that is drawn. It's everyone else that deserves that second chance to be able to become a part of society. We ask them to change their ways, and then we continually penalize them even after they've served their time. And voting is just a start for them to reacclimate them to society. You know, the fact that we've limited to the type of jobs that they can have, the fact that we limited them to where they could live and how to actually become a participating member citizens should not be a surprise if they end up back in jail.
What is interesting is that we've had several high-profile cases in Florida and elsewhere of people who are convicted of felonies, sometimes politicians for corruption. They can't vote any longer, but they could run for their old offices.
Yeah, tell me about it. I just think it's a really twisted system. I think that very much like a lot of other issues, it's just a battering ram for politicians to fluff up their base and say they're hard on crime. It is not a deterrent. And you know, when a felon is committing that crime, they're not thinking, oh no, I'm going to lose my voting rights. You know, chances are they weren't even really associating themselves as a voting citizen. But this is our chance to start bringing them back into society and to say, we respect you, and therefore, you know, we want you to respect our system.
All right, so Frank, try to explain this to us, because it seems like there are two tracks going on right now. A federal court has said that the current Florida law is unconstitutional, but you also have this ballot petition that is now on the ballot. Is there only one petition, or are there competing petitions? How is this working?
There's a lot going on, and so the federal district court's decision it doesn't immediately restore voting rights, but it says that the Scott's reforms and changes are unconstitutional. I think there's going to be a pause, and we're going to see what happens with, there's a citizens initiative that has made it to the ballot that's going to go back essentially to what Charlie Crist's reforms were, which is after you have served your time, your parole, and your probation, unless you committed a murder or a sexual felony, then you will automatically have your voting rights restored. However, one of the tactics sometimes that we see when one of the parties does not like what they see coming down the line in terms of a citizens initiative is to try to put onto the ballot a competed, watered-down version and or pass legislation through the legislature. Both of those things are on the table right now. We do have some activity up in Tallahassee in terms of a potential new statute that would be, again, a very restrictive, watered-down version. And there's actually two proposed amendments being considered by the Constitution Revision Commission that could ultimately end up on the ballot that are different.
Yeah. And people don't quite understand that. Right now, Carlos Barufa, the Suncoast developer, is the chairman of the Constitutional
Revision Committee.
Committee.
CRC.
And so potentially, we may have two things on the ballot this fall which do two very different things.
That's correct.
So just like they did with solar the last time, and what they did with medical marijuana, they do this just to confuse the voter. Right now you have every elected official saying, oh, let us handle it. We have a bill that'll actually be doing the exact same thing, and let us do our job. But the truth of the matter is, it doesn't do the same thing. It's just a distraction. So the voter has to pay closer attention to, number one, who they trust, and number two, to have all the information, so when they go into that voting booth, they vote on the correct amendment. And I can assure you, one will get them what they want and one won't.
Let me ask you all this, and you both say that tomorrow, if felons were given the restoration of their voting rights, it would take a while for it to have any real impact. Florida residents will go and vote on this constitutional amendment in the fall, but could the federal decision prompt some kind of change that would allow felons to vote in this current election or the next presidential election? Because, we're hearing things could be a little bit closer than they usually are.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to see anything in 2018 because the federal court did not tell Governor Scott what to do. All the court did was said what you have in place is unconstitutional. And so the Scott administration, if everything failed, would have to come back with something else, but it could just be an incremental change, which is why what you see on your ballot is going to be so important. And no, there are not going to be any changes to the status of felons in Florida prior to the 2018 election.
And they will kick it down the road just to see what happens in the November election anyway with the amendment. And I want to say something else. Adam Putnam is a part of the Clemency Board. He's a part of the cabinet who votes on who gets in and who doesn't. And as it stands now, there is a 15-year backlog for those who actually apply to get their voting restorated.
So let me ask you a bit. Let's say that you are out of prison now, that you have served your parole, you've done everything you're supposed to do. In reality, you are not going to have your case heard for 15 years?
You have to wait 5 years before you even apply, and then once you apply, then you go on to this list, and right now the cabinet comes together once a month or quarterly.
Once a month, and there's 363 applications considered a year. That's it.
Yeah, they do about, every time they come together, they'll do maybe 50, and they reject about half of them.
Yeah,
and so the backlog is actually at 20,000 right now. You're going to go on the back of this list after you wait 5 to 7 years, as opposed to other states where automatically, once you're finished serving your time, your parole and your probation, your rights are restored.
And think of the amount of money the taxpayers are being charged for this activity that produces pretty much nothing, as opposed to what Charlie Crist did, which was just an automatic, restoration of it. It just doesn't make sense that we would even want our governor and his cabinet to spend time on this,
And right now, this is really in the purview of the governor and the cabinet.
Totally. It's totally at their discretion. It's completely at their discretion, even who they consider at that time. And it's just a waste of effort.
So we have less than a minute left.
Yeah.
The Democrats are for the restoration of voting rights. You have Adam Putnam, who is, saying, certain crimes not.
He's not against.
Ron DeSantis, the congressman, hasn't even given a response.
Yeah, well.
I think this issue is one in which I don't even remember that much in the way of outcry when Scott did this. I think it's an issue that it's not one that the Scott administration wants out there in the public. It's not one that they want to be talking about, and so
they don't want to go on record with it.
No, they just
so close to the election.
We have to take a quick break, and we'll be back for final thoughts in a moment.
Thanks.
And our guest joining us right now for final thoughts. Susan, is it too early to try to see where the public is in terms of this? Because obviously, if this is on the November ballot, it has to get above 70% of the vote for it to actually become law. 60, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I actually, we know that the public is in support of it. It's not easy getting a voter's amendment on the ballot. It really isn't. And so the numbers are there, and the assumption is you sign your name to it, you support it. You know, why would you not vote for it? The public is actually very supportive of it. The ACLU and a lot of other really good organizations are working hard, and they're going to make sure that everyone is educated so they know what to do when they go to the polls.
Frank, when we had the ballot petitions in terms of solar, in the last go-around, there was a tremendous amount of money spent on the other side. Are we likely to see that
million.
here? But the fact that Republicans are not really out there right now railing against this, a reflection of the fact that they're not going to spend a lot of money on it.
Very possibly. We'll know a lot more on May 10th when we have the final slate from the Constitution Revision Commission. If they have a competing amendment, it's going to be a lot of splaining to do to the voters. We're having, again, competing amendments that seem to confuse them. If this thing is a standalone amendment, I think it stands a good chance we may see some money spent against it, but it's going to be a confusing ballot. There's going to be a lot on this ballot between the CRC slate, as well as we already have 4 amendments that are coming through, 2 from the legislature and 2 from the citizens initiative process.
And we just have a few seconds left, but given there's only 2 weeks left in the legislative session now, nothing is going to be done on this by the legislature.
Yeah, I wouldn't even be concerned with the legislation on it. It's just not going to go anywhere. And I don't think this is a really big issue for the Republicans. I really don't.
Okay, well, I have to leave it there. FYI, you can watch past discussions on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. And for the latest on local breaking news, don't forget to download the updated version of our app. If your current app doesn't work, it's expired. Just go to the App Store and re-download it by searching for WWSB or My Suncoast. We want to thank both our guests for being here tonight. Frank Alcock is a political science professor at New College, and Susan Nylon is with the Nylon Report.